Hey guys, happy Monday. So what I want to discuss in this video, I'm back here in my garden, but I was rereading a Soil Owner's Manual by John Sticka. It's just absolutely phenomenal book, easy to read. Highly recommend it for anybody that's interested in this stuff. I mean, it's kind of a play on a manual, right? Like a truck manual, or if you bought a new computer or something like that, you'd read the manual before you try to operate that vehicle or that new piece of hardware. Well, it's kind of the same idea as why do we manage soil without ever reading the manual as to how it really functions, right? So that's kind of the premise behind John Sticka's book. It's just absolutely phenomenal. Highly recommend it. One of the things that was brought up in that book recently when I was reading this morning was about carbon and nitrogen ratios, and that's something that's thrown around a lot. You hear carbon and nitrogen, balance, polyculture, symbiotic, right? There's all these fancy words that are thrown around, but what does it really mean? So I wanted to highlight that quickly and hopefully shed some light as to what we mean by carbon and nitrogen. So in the beginning of this, I want to just tell you, so every plant species is made up of carbon and nitrogen. So like a heavy straw-like substance, let's say some rye grain thatch, see that? You can see it's pretty dense. It's a high carbon, lower nitrogen ratio plant. Clover, like this, it's my interseeded crop, is a very low carbon to nitrogen plant. The higher the carbon to nitrogen ratio, specific to the plant species, the longer it takes the microbes to break that particular product down. Now, as your soil bacteria to fungi levels in the soil get higher, you may be able to break down higher carbon to nitrogen ratios quicker relative to that specific soil type, or soil biological populations, I should say. But it's still the same idea, is the duration of time it takes specific to that soil, specific to that carbon to nitrogen ratio per plant, is going to be significantly longer for wheat still than it would be for, say, a clover or alfalfa. So hopefully that makes sense, that even though as you increase bacterial populations in your soil and increase symbiotic relationships, your higher carbon to nitrogen ratio plants, although they might get decomposed quicker, are still going to take longer to decompose than lower carbon to nitrogen ratio plants. So I hope I get this right, but the average microbial diet is 8-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, right? Or that's what they need to live, or that's what their makeup is, I should say, excuse me. So in order to sustain themselves, a perfect microbial diet is 24-to-1. So that's why composters a lot of times strive for like 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratios, because what that does is, if you have too much carbon and not enough nitrogen plants, the microbes will break down all of the carbon sources, and there won't be enough nitrogen sources to sustain themselves, and vice versa. So if you have just a whole bunch of nitrogen, right, so a monoculture of, let's say, clover, you don't have enough carbon sources to sustain the microbes that need the carbon sources and maintain that part of their diet. So carbon is energy. Nitrogen is essentially like protein for microbes. So that's a way to think about it. So the reason I'm showing you this is, in this part of my garden here, you can see there is a good amount of thatch. Yeah, I have to scrape for a while until I start getting the dirt. So it does vary throughout the garden. But in here, I also then have clover. I'm trying to show you. Interseeding. So what that allows me to do is, I have a high carbon, being wheat and rye straw, that was part of the cover crop that was mowed off. I also then have leaf matter. I also then have lower carbon to nitrogen ratio species in grass, right? So I throw grass clippings. I've done a couple videos on that. After I mow and collect them, I'll try to spread those out as thin as possible. So those are a little bit lower carbon to nitrogen ratios. I also have the growing interseeded crop between my crop species, with being mostly clover, or different types of clovers. There's also some sunflowers in here, some rye grain that's still established. And what I'm doing is I'm mowing this about every 2 weeks. I come through with a push mower, and I don't bag that. I don't want to remove that lower carbon to nitrogen ratio species. So I come through and I push mow this, and I throw all those leaf clippings, a lot of clover, lower carbon to nitrogen ratio, onto the top of the soil to be part of the residue management program. So what that does is it allows me to balance the residue management on the top of the soil between higher carbon and lower carbon to nitrogen ratio species. So you do want to find that balance. So that's something to keep in mind. You don't want too thick of just a full wheat mat without any balance of carbon and nitrogen, and you don't want just a monoculture of clover or alfalfa or something like that, because those clippings, when they do get clipped, essentially they're going to get ate by the microbes very, very quickly, and there's just not going to be enough food to sustain the microbiology in optimum shape for the long term. So hopefully that sheds a little bit of light on the complex carbon and nitrogen discussions that are out there. I hope you all enjoy this. Build Better Soil on Instagram, Build Better Soil Facebook group. Please join, share, subscribe if you like this stuff. Get outside, guys, and build better soil.